She didn't scream. She didn't run. Emily Carter stepped off that stagecoach, one hand gripping the handle of a battered wooden trunk, and she watched a grown man raise his fist against a child who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, a little boy shaking flour off his hands, tears already streaming down his face, and something in her simply stopped calculating risk. She dropped the trunk. She walked straight into that man's path, and she stood there. If you've ever seen a woman change a family's entire future in a single moment, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I want to know how far this story has traveled. This is the kind of story that doesn't end the way anyone expects, and you do not want to miss what's inside that trunk. The stagecoach had been running 6 hours late out of Billings, and by the time it rattled to a stop on the main street of Coldwater Creek, most of the town had stopped waiting and gone back to their business. The afternoon was sharp and gray, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself but simply settled into a person's bones without asking permission. Dust moved in slow spirals between the buildings. A dog slept in the shadow of the general store. 3 men leaned against the post outside the saloon and watched the coach with the idle curiosity of people who had nothing better to do and knew it. Emily Carter was the last passenger off. She came down the coach steps carefully, one hand on the rail, the other gripping the handle of a wooden trunk that was older than she was and showed every year of it. The brass fittings had gone dark. The corners were worn smooth. Someone had carved initials into the lid a long time ago, EAC, and the letters had been touched so many times that they were almost gone. She set the trunk down on the hard-packed dirt of the street and straightened up and looked around Coldwater Creek, the way a person looks at a thing they are trying to decide whether to fear. She was slender, not in the way that suggested wealth or leisure, but in the way that suggested a life that hadn't always been easy. Her coat was clean, but well worn at the cuffs. Her chestnut hair was pinned back neatly. Her green eyes were quiet, not shy exactly, but careful. The kind of careful that comes from having been wrong about a situation before and not intending to be wrong again. The men outside the saloon looked at her. One of them said something low, and the others laughed. She didn't look their way. What she looked at was the scene already unfolding 20 feet ahead of her, a wide, thick-armed ranch hand in a dirty canvas coat, his face brick red with the particular fury of a man who has decided someone smaller than him is responsible for his bad day. And standing in front of him shaking, covered in a fine white powder of spilled flour that dusted his dark hair and his coat and his small red hands, was a boy who could not have been older than 4. The boy was trying very hard not to cry. He was losing. "That flour don't pay for itself," the ranch hand was saying. He had his voice pitched low, which was somehow worse than shouting. "You think your daddy's money grows on trees. You think I got nothing better to do than—" "Hey!" The boy's voice broke on the single syllable. "I didn't mean to. I didn't—" "Boy, I don't care what you meant." The man's arm came back. Emily dropped the trunk. The sound of it hitting the dirt was loud enough that one of the horses tied at the rail threw its head. She was already moving, not running, but walking fast with her chin up and her eyes fixed on the man's raised arm, and she put herself between the ranch hand and the child with about 2 seconds to spare. "That's enough," she said. The man stared at her. Up close, he was very large. She came to roughly his collarbone. "Lady," he said slowly, "you want to move yourself out of the way." "No," Emily said. "I don't." Behind her, she could feel the boy's small hand closing around the back of her coat. She kept her eyes on the ranch hand. "You got no business putting yourself in this," he said. "And you have no business raising your hand against a 4-year-old child," she said. Her voice was steady, not loud, but steady, the kind of steady that takes practice. "So I reckon we've both found ourselves somewhere we didn't expect to be this afternoon." There was a beat of silence. The men outside the saloon had turned fully to watch now. So had the woman sweeping the steps of the dry goods store. So had the boy behind the barbershop window. The ranch hand looked at Emily Carter at her slight frame, her worn coat, her absolute refusal to step aside, and he made a sound in his throat that was close to a laugh. "You're crazy," he said. "Possibly. Emily agreed. But I'm standing here either way. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then something shifted in his face. Not shame, not quite, but the calculation of a man who has decided the fight isn't worth the effort today. And he dropped his arm and stepped back and turned and walked away without another word. Emily let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She turned around and crouched down so she was level with the boy. He was still shaking, still powdered in flour, and there were tear tracks through the dust on his face. His eyes were enormous and very dark. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded once tightly the way children nod when they are trying to appear braver than they feel. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Thomas," he whispered. "Thomas." She kept her voice soft. "That man was wrong. You hear me? Whatever happened with that flower, that was an accident, and he had no right to speak to you that way. None." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Are you the lady who's coming to our house?" Emily blinked. "I'm sorry. Papa put a notice in the paper," Thomas said. "He said a lady was coming on the stage, to cook for us." He looked at her with the devastating directness of small children. "Are you her?" Emily Carter looked at the boy in front of her, flower-covered, wide-eyed 4 years old, and already trying so hard to be brave, and she felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. "I believe I am," she said. She heard boots on the boardwalk behind her before she heard the voice. "Thomas." The voice was low and rough-edged, and it carried the particular exhaustion of a man who has been tired for longer than he can remember. Emily straightened and turned. Nathan Brooks was not what she had been expecting. She was not sure what she had been expecting. The advertisement had said, "Widower, 6 children, mountain ranch, seeks capable woman." But she had formed some image in her mind during the long days on the coach, and it had not quite been this. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that comes from years of physical work rather than any natural advantage. His coat was heavy canvas at the elbows. His hat was dark and weathered. He had a beard that needed attending to, and dark eyes that were taking in the scene in front of him. The flower on his son, the retreating shape of the ranch hand, the woman standing between them with an expression that was equal parts confusion and wariness. He came forward and put a hand on Thomas's head, checking him over the way parents do, quick and automatic, looking for damage. "He all right?" he asked, not to Emily, to Thomas. "He's fine," Emily said. "A man was—" "I know what was happening." Nathan looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw the moment his assessment arrived at its conclusion. He didn't say anything for a breath. But she had learned long ago to read what people didn't say, and what his silence said was, "She's too small, too young, too fragile. This isn't going to work." He said, "You're Emily Carter." "I am." "From the advertisement." "Yes." He nodded slowly, looked down at his hat brim, looked back at her. "How old are you?" 26. "You ever cooked for 6 children before?" "Not 6, she said honestly, "but I've cooked for more." Something moved through his expression that might have been skepticism. "The advertisement said capable," he said. "I need someone who can handle a mountain winter. This isn't a town posting. The nearest neighbor is 9 miles. The road up ices over by November, and sometimes it doesn't open until March. I've got 6 kids and a ranch that doesn't stop needing work because the weather's bad." He paused. "I need to know you understand what you're agreeing to." "I understand," Emily said. "With respect, ma'am, I'm not certain you do." His eyes moved briefly to her trunk, to her coat, back to her face. "You look like you've come from somewhere a good deal more comfortable than a mountain in Montana." "I've come from a great many places," Emily said, "and I've found that comfort is considerably less reliable than people expect, so I've stopped depending on it." She met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Brooks, you placed an advertisement for a wife who could cook. I answered it. I am here. I am not fragile, whatever I may look like to you right now, and I can do considerably more than cook if you'll give me the chance to show you." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's what worries me," he said. And then he picked up her trunk, both hands like it weighed nothing, though she knew perfectly well it did not, and he carried it to the wagon and loaded it in the back, and he lifted Thomas up into the seat, and he looked back at her once. "You coming?" he said. Emily Carter picked up her bag and walked to the wagon. From the boardwalk. Nearby, a woman in a good coat leaned toward a neighbor and spoke without troubling to lower her voice. "She won't last the month," the woman said. "Look at her. Too delicate by half. He'll be placing another advertisement come January." "If he's still got a ranch by January," the neighbor said, and they both laughed. Nathan did not react. Emily did not react, but she heard it. And she filed it away, the way she filed most things, quietly, carefully, in a place where it would be useful later. The drive up to the Brooks Ranch took nearly 2 hours on a road that was less a road than a strong suggestion. The wagon pitched and lurched over frozen ruts, and the cold came down the mountain in waves that cut through Emily's coat in ways that made her quietly revise her preparations. She sat in the wagon bed with Thomas, who had fallen asleep against her arm with the boneless trust of exhausted children, and she watched the landscape change as they climbed the trees, thickening the sky, narrowing between the ridgelines, the last of the afternoon light going flat and pale. Nathan did not speak. She did not push it. She was good at silence. She had learned it from her father, who believed that most of the information a person needed could be gathered by paying careful attention and keeping quiet. Dr. Arthur Carter had been a precise man with a warm heart and a gift for reading people that his daughter had inherited in full. She had spent 15 years beside him in his practice, reading the ledgers, watching the diagnoses, learning the Latin names for things that could kill a person, and the remedies that might stop them from doing so. She had done the accounts for his patients who couldn't pay in money, and kept track of who owed what in the careful system of obligation and goodwill that made a rural practice function. She had not planned to end up answering a mail-order advertisement in a Montana paper. But plans had a way of colliding with reality, and the reality was that her father was gone. The practice was gone, and the cousin who'd taken in her family's debts had been less interested in settling them than in seizing the property they were attached to. She had left with the trunk and what remained of her dignity, and the certain knowledge that she was more capable than the world had yet given her credit for. The Brooks Ranch appeared between the trees at the end of the light. It was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, solid timber built by someone who knew what they were doing. A barn, a smokehouse. 2 smaller outbuildings, a kitchen garden put to bed for winter, under a thick mulch of straw. There were good fences, or there had been. She could see where 2 sections had been recently broken and repaired, the new wood pale against the weathered gray of the old. She noticed that. She noticed most things. 5 figures were standing on the porch. She had known there were 6 children. The oldest Nathan had mentioned was 16. A daughter. Then a son of 14, a son of 11, a daughter of 8, and the 4-year-old Thomas, currently asleep against her arm. The 6th she couldn't account for until she got down from the wagon and counted the faces again, and realized the sleeping weight against her had been the 6th. Thomas, who had ridden up with her in the back. 5 pairs of eyes watched her cross the yard. None of them smiled. The oldest was Clara. Emily knew her immediately. She had her father's bearing, that same held-in quality, the careful way of standing that said she was paying attention to everything and had already formed an opinion she wasn't sure she was allowed to express. She was 16, and she was beautiful, and she looked at Emily Carter with a flatness of expression that made the ranch hand's anger from that afternoon feel almost warm by comparison. "This is Miss Carter," Nathan said, coming around the wagon. "She'll be taking on the house and cooking. Clara, she'll need to know where things are kept." Clara said, "Hello." The word had no temperature in it whatsoever. "Hello," Emily said. "You must be Clara. Your father's spoken of you." "Has he?" It was not a question. The boy of 14 stepped forward slightly. He had a direct manner that reminded Emily of her father. "I'm William," he said. "This is Henry." He indicated the 11-year-old, who nodded. "That's Bess." The 8-year-old, who looked at Emily with open and uncomplicated curiosity, which was something. "And I'm guessing you already know Tommy." "We've met," Emily said. Thomas, now awake and climbing down from the wagon with great dignity, said, She stopped a man from hitting me. There was a brief silence. Nathan looked at Thomas. What man? Caldwell, Thomas said. He was mad because I knocked over the flower. Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked at Emily. She looked back at him and said nothing because it wasn't her information to add to, and she had already said what she'd said. He was going to hit him, Thomas continued with the merciless specificity of small children. Miss Emily stood in the way. Another silence. This one had a different quality. Clara's expression had shifted almost imperceptibly. Not warmth, but something. A slight adjustment in the set of her mouth. Well, Nathan said finally, let's get inside before we all freeze. The house was cold in the way of houses that haven't had enough hands to keep them warm. It was not dirty, but it was the particular kind of cluttered that comes from too many people and too little time boots stacked at odd angles, coats hung over chairs because the pegs were full. A table that had been cleared but not truly cleaned in a way that spoke to exhaustion rather than neglect. The kitchen hearth had gone low. The bread that someone had started that morning sat unfinished on the work table, the dough dried over and sunken. Emily set down her bag. She took off her coat. She rolled up her sleeves. Where do you keep the salt? She asked. Clara stared at her. You're going to cook now tonight. The bread needs starting over, Emily said, moving to the hearth to build the fire. And whatever's in that pot on the back hook needs attention before it becomes something else entirely. So yes, now, tonight. She looked at Clara over her shoulder. Salt. Clara pointed at the shelf above the work table. Emily nodded and got to work. What she made that night was not complicated. A proper bread, a bean soup augmented with smoked pork and dried herbs she found in a tin near the back of the spice shelf, a pan of corn cake for the children. But she made it correctly, which is a different thing than making it fancy, and she made it with the particular efficiency of someone who has fed people from limited resources many times and knows how to make a pound of ingredients feed 6. They sat at the table, all 8 of them, Nathan at the head, children on both sides, Emily at the far end, and she watched them eat. Thomas fell on his soup with an enthusiasm that suggested the last 2 days had not involved much of it. Henry ate carefully and quickly and asked without looking up. Can I have more? Help yourself, Emily said. William said, it's good, simply as a statement of fact. Then he went back to eating. Nathan said nothing. But he ate 2 full bowls and didn't leave the table when he finished the way she suspected he usually did. Clara moved her spoon through her bowl without tasting it for a full 5 minutes. Then, when she thought no one was watching, she took a bite, then another. She didn't say it was good, but she finished it. And she accepted a second piece of corn cake when Emily offered it without making her ask twice. Bess said, Are you going to stay? The table went quiet. That's not something we ask, Nathan said. I was just asking, Bess said. Emily looked at the 8-year-old who was looking back at her with that open, uncomplicated directness that Emily was already deeply grateful for. I'm planning to, she said. Is that all right with you? Bess considered this with great seriousness. Then she nodded once decisively and went back to her corn cake. After supper, after the children were settled, Nathan found Emily in the kitchen cleaning the pots. You don't have to do that tonight, he said. I don't mind, she said. She handed him a towel without being asked. He looked at it for a moment, then took it and started drying. They worked in silence for a while. Bess took to you fast, he said. Children usually do or they don't, Emily said. You can't manufacture it. Clara's going to be harder. I know. She was close to her mother. I'm not trying to replace her mother, Emily said quietly. I'm not sure anyone could, and I'm not certain trying to would be the right thing even if it were possible. She set the last pot on the shelf and turned to face him. I'm here to help your family, Mr. Brooks, not to take anyone's place. Nathan looked at her for a moment. He had a way of looking that she was beginning to understand, not hostile, but weighing as if he were measuring the space between what a person said and what they meant. You stopped Caldwell, he said. Someone had to. He works for Harmon Daly, Nathan said. Daly owns the mill and half the businesses in Coldwater Creek. It's not smart to make an enemy of his people." "I didn't make an enemy," Emily said. "I just declined to move out of the way." Something shifted at the corner of Nathan's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the territory adjacent to one. "You said you could do more than cook," he said. "I did." "What does that mean?" Emily considered him, the tiredness in his face, the weight in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man who has been carrying something heavy alone for a long time and has forgotten that this is not the natural state of things. "It means," she said, "that I'm good at more than cooking. My father was a physician and an accountant. I worked beside him for 15 years. I know medicine not like a doctor, but enough. I know bookkeeping. I know food preservation, livestock management, crop rotation for difficult soil. I know how to read a contract." She kept her voice matter of fact. "I'm telling you because you should know what you have in this house. Not because I expect you to do anything about it right now." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Why'd you answer my advertisement?" he said. "A woman who knows all that. You could have found work in a city, teaching, accounting." Emily looked at her hands. "My father died 8 months ago," she said. "His debts were inherited by a cousin who was not interested in settling them fairly. I have the contents of that trunk and the things I know how to do. And I answered your advertisement because it was honest." She met his gaze. "It didn't promise more than it could give. It said what you needed and what you could offer. I respected that." Nathan was quiet again. Then, "The room off the kitchen is yours. It's small, but it's warm. The flue runs close by." "Thank you. Breakfast at 5. The children wake early, and they need to eat before chores." "I'll be up at 4, Emily said. He nodded once, hung the towel on its hook, started toward the door. "Mr. Brooks," Emily said. He turned. "Your fence line on the east side," she said. "The new repair work. Has that happened before?" Nathan's expression changed, just slightly. "Twice," he said. "Since September." "And the livestock?" The change became more pronounced. "How'd you know about the livestock?" "I didn't," Emily said. "I noticed the newer posts, and I saw you had a smaller herd for the size of your outbuildings. Two things that don't add up together usually point toward a third." She watched his face carefully. "Is someone making trouble for you, Mr. Brooks?" For a moment, he looked like a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't decided whether to step back from. "Get some rest, Miss Carter," he said, and he went. Emily turned and stood in the kitchen alone for a moment, listening to the wind come down off the mountain and test the corners of the house. She could hear it in the eaves, pushing and finding and looking for a way in. She had heard that sound before in other places. She knew what it meant. Something was looking for a way in, and it wasn't the wind. She wiped down the last of the work table, banked the fire, and went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. She lay on her back in the small room off the kitchen, listening to the house settle and breathe around her, and she thought about the broken fences and the missing livestock, and the way Nathan Brooks had answered her question by not answering it. She thought about Harmon Daly and his ranch hand Caldwell, and the particular kind of contempt in the townspeople's voices when they'd spoken about the Brooks family. She thought about what it meant that a man as capable and careful as Nathan Brooks, and she could see that he was both in the quality of his fences and his buildings, and the way his children, for all their grief, were clearly loved, would be showing signs of things going wrong without appearing to understand why. She thought for a long time. Then she made herself stop thinking because tomorrow was 4 o'clock and the children needed to eat. She closed her eyes. She did not know yet what was inside the walls of this particular problem, but she would find out. She always did. The trunk sat at the foot of her bed, silent and locked, holding everything she had left of the life before. She had carried it across 2 states and a mountain pass, and she would carry it further if she had to. But for the first time in 8 months, she had the quiet, tentative feeling that she might not have to. That this cold house, and these wary children, and this tired, guarded man, and this mountain with its dark fences and its secrets, might be exactly the place she'd been looking for without knowing it. She closed her eyes. She slept. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere on the east fence line in the dark, Something shifted that had not been there the day before. But Emily Carter was already asleep, and the morning was still hours away, and some things reveal themselves only in their own time. She was up before 4. The fire in the kitchen hearth had burned down to coals, and Emily built it back carefully, feeding it small pieces first, the way her father had taught her. You don't rush a fire, you earn it. By the time the first gray light began pressing against the windows, she had bread rising near the warmth, a pot of oats moving on the hook, and a pan of salt pork going in the skillet. She had also, in the quieter minutes before the house woke, done something else entirely. She had walked the interior of the ground floor, not snooping, assessing. There was a difference, though she understood most people wouldn't see it that way. She moved through the rooms the way her father had taught her to move through a new situation, slowly paying attention, cataloging what was there and what was conspicuously absent. The pantry first. She held the candle up and looked at the shelves, and what she saw told her a story that Nathan Brooks hadn't put into words the night before. The shelves were not bare, but they were not right. A family of 7 heading into a Montana winter should have had that pantry packed floor to ceiling. She knew what a properly stocked mountain pantry looked like. Her father had kept one, and she had restocked it every autumn without fail. What she was looking at now was maybe 60% of what it should have been. Enough to get through a bad month. Not enough to get through a bad winter. The smoked meat supply in the smokehouse she'd checked through the small window, rather than wake the dog, was similarly thin. She stood in the pantry for a long moment with her candle and her calculations, and then she went back to her oatmeal and her bread and her salt pork, and she added that information to the picture she was building. The children came down in order of age, which told her something about the household's rhythm. William first, already dressed, already carrying the weight of someone who had decided he was the man of the house in the hour before his father arrived. He looked at the set table and the pot on the hook, and something moved across his face too quickly for her to name. "You didn't have to start this early," he said. "It's not early," Emily said. "It's the right time." He sat down without arguing. He was going to be easy, she thought. Not easy in the sense of simple, he was clearly not simple, but easy in the sense that he was fair-minded, and he would judge her by what she did, rather than what he expected. Henry came next, then Bess, who took the seat closest to Emily, without appearing to notice she'd done it. Thomas came down last among the children, his dark hair standing at angles, dragging a coat that was 2 sizes too big for him, and that he had clearly been sleeping in. Clara did not come down. Emily put a bowl aside for her and said nothing about it. Nathan came in from outside. He'd been to the barn already. She could tell by the cold on his coat and the particular set of his jaw that meant the morning hadn't started well. He sat at the head of the table and accepted the coffee she poured without looking up. "How many head did you check this morning?" she asked, because she was going to need to stop circling it. Nathan looked up. "3 are gone," he said. His voice was flat. "The 2 I thought were off their feed last week, and a heifer that was fine 2 days ago." "Gone how?" William said sharply. "Like strayed or gone like—" "Gone," Nathan said. The single word closed the subject for the children. But not for Emily. She said, "The east fence was cut again." Nathan looked at her steadily. "The east fence was cut," he confirmed. "Different section. Whoever's doing it knows how to do it so it looks like natural breakage." "It's daily," William said. His jaw was tight. "Papa, it's been daily every time." "William. It is, though." "That's not a thing we say without proof," Nathan said. "And we don't have proof." "We don't have 3 cattle either," William said. The table went quiet. Nathan set down his coffee cup. He looked at William with an expression that was not anger, but something more complicated. The look of a man who knows his son is right and cannot afford for him to be right out loud. Not yet. Emily ate her oatmeal and let the silence do its work. After breakfast, after Nathan and William had gone back to the fence, Emily did what she always did when she needed to understand a situation completely. She asked the person least likely to guard their information. "Bess," she said, handing the 8-year-old a dry cloth, "tell me about Mr. Daly." Bess dried the bowl she'd been handed with the focus of a child who takes tasks seriously. "He owns a lot of things," she said. "The mill and the feed store and the big house on the South Road. Papa used to buy grain from him. Used to. Before they argued. Bess set the bowl on the shelf. Accepted another. I don't know what they argued about. Clara says it's grown-up business and I shouldn't ask. She paused. I asked Papa anyway. What did he say? He said Mr. Daly wanted to buy our land, and Papa said no, and then things started going wrong. Bess said it with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child reporting information she's already organized to her own satisfaction. Papa thinks it's just bad luck. William thinks it's Mr. Daly. I think William's right. Emily handed her the last bowl. Do you? She said. Daly's got bad eyes, Bess said with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old's judgment. Not blind bad, mean bad, like he's always counting something. Emily looked at the child beside her and thought, you are going to be formidable when you grow up. Thank you, Bess, she said. That's very helpful. The morning progressed. Emily got the bread into the oven, put a pot of beans to soak for supper, and then did something that she suspected would create exactly the complication she needed to navigate carefully. She went looking for Clara. She found her in the room she shared with Bess, sitting at the window, with a mending basket untouched in her lap, staring at the tree line. Emily knocked on the open door. May I come in? Clara's shoulders didn't move. It's your house too now, I suppose. Emily came in and sat in the chair by the wall not too close. It's your house, she said. I'm a guest who's here to help. There's a difference. Papa married you, Clara said. Her voice was carefully empty. That makes you mistress of the house. Your father and I have an arrangement, Emily said. That's not the same thing. Clara turned and looked at her. Her eyes were her father's dark, careful weighing. What kind of arrangement? A practical one, Emily said. He needs someone to manage the household and care for the children. I need a place to contribute what I know how to do. We suit each other's practical needs. That's honest, and I think you're someone who appreciates honesty, so I'm offering it. Clara was quiet for a moment. My mother died in March, she said. I know, Emily said. She was sick for 2 years before that. I ran this house for 2 years. I was 14 when I started. Her chin came up slightly. I know what I'm doing. I can see that, Emily said. And she meant it. The house, for all its evident strain, had the bones of something organized. The children had routines. The pantry had system to its arrangement. The mending basket was full because there was a system for collecting what needed mending, not because nothing was being done. You've done a remarkable job. Clara blinked. Don't try to. I'm not trying to anything, Emily said. I'm stating a fact. You held this household together under circumstances that would have undone most adults, and you did it as a 14-year-old girl while grieving your mother. I'm not here to erase that. I couldn't if I tried. She kept her gaze level. What I am here to do is help, not replace you, not take over what you've built. Help, if you'll let me. The silence stretched. Clara looked out the window again. The beans need to soak by morning if you want them tender by supper, she said. Already done, Emily said. Another pause. Thomas has a cough that comes on in cold weather. He needs the steam cloth if it gets bad at night. I'll keep it close to the hearth. Clara picked up the mending. She still didn't look at Emily, but the particular rigidity in her shoulders had shifted by about 10 degrees, which was not nothing. Breakfast was good, she said very quietly. Emily stood. There's a bowl still warm for you in the kitchen, she said. I'll have lunch ready at noon. She left Clara to her mending and went downstairs, and she allowed herself privately exactly 2 seconds of relief. One down. The trouble started in earnest 4 days later. Emily had been tracking things quietly. The missing cattle, the cut fences, the state of the grain storage, the patterns of what went wrong and when. She kept a small notebook, the kind her father had always carried, and in the evenings after the children were down, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote things down. Numbers, dates, the estimated value of what had been lost, the timing of Nathan's movements relative to when damage occurred. On the 4th evening, Nathan came in from checking the south pasture, and she could tell before he sat down that something new had gone wrong. The grain storage, he said. She looked up. The south bin. Something got in it. He pulled off his hat and set it on the table. He looked tired in a way that went beyond the body. Weevils or wet or both. Roughly half the winter supply. Emily set down her pen. Half. Half. That's not an accident, she said. Nathan looked at her. His jaw was tight. Emily. Weevils don't establish in a sealed dry bin in 4 days, she said. That bin was clean when I checked it Tuesday. I checked it specifically because I was cataloging the supplies. The seal on that bin was broken deliberately, and the damp that takes intent. He was quiet. Someone had access to your property, she said. At night, close enough to the storage building to break the seal without disturbing the dog. She watched his face. How often does Caldwell come up this road? Nathan stood up from the table. I'm not making accusations without... I'm not asking you to accuse anyone, Emily said. She kept her voice even. I'm asking you a question about logistics. Who knows the layout of your outbuildings well enough to target that specific bin? Nathan's hand went to the back of his neck. He stood with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned. Daly was up here in August, he said, inspecting the property, when I still thought we might, when I thought there might be a loan arrangement. He walked the outbuildings. All of them. Emily nodded slowly. She picked up her pen and wrote that down. What are you writing? Nathan asked. A timeline, she said, of everything that's gone wrong since August, with dates, estimated values, and probable access requirements for each incident. She looked up. Because if someone is trying to take your land, they're going to do it through legal channels eventually. And when they do, you're going to want a record that demonstrates a pattern. Nathan stared at her. You said you knew how to read a contract, he said. And ledgers, Emily said. And legal correspondence if it comes to that. He sat back down at this table slowly. Why are you doing this? The question caught her differently than she'd expected. She looked at him, at the exhaustion in his face and the stubborn set of his shoulders and the way he held on to things. She was learning the way a man holds onto a rope over a long drop, both hands no slack. Because those are your children, she said simply. And this is their home, and I'm not willing to watch someone take it from them if I know a way to stop it. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression was shifting slowly, the way ice shifts in a thaw, too gradual to see in any single moment, but undeniable in the accumulation. He said, The notebook. When you're done with the timeline, I want to see it. Of course, Emily said. She went back to writing. He stayed at the table. He was still there an hour later when she put the pen down and got up to check on the bread she'd put to rise overnight. He didn't leave, and she didn't ask him to. The breakthrough with Thomas came first, as breakthroughs with small children often do, fast and total, and in a completely unexpected direction. She was in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, working on a technique she'd learned from her father's housekeeper, a method for preserving root vegetables over a long winter by layering them in dry sand in wooden boxes, and Thomas appeared at her elbow, wearing his oversized coat and his most serious expression. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Packing carrots," she said. "Why are you putting them in sand?" "Because the sand keeps the moisture stable. Carrots packed in dry sand in a cool cellar will last 5 or 6 months. She held one out to him. "Here. Push it in tip first until just the top is covered." Thomas took the carrot. He considered it with great seriousness. He pushed it into the sand with the precise care of a child doing a task for the first time that he intends to do correctly. "Like that. Exactly like that." She handed him another. "Your grandfather, my father taught me this. He used to say half of surviving a hard winter is the summer before it." Thomas worked in silence for a moment. Then, "Did your papa die?" "He did," Emily said. 8 months ago." Thomas digested this. "Mama died in March," he said. "I know," Emily said gently. "Do you still miss your papa?" Emily handed him another carrot. "Every single day," she said. Thomas packed it carefully. "Clara says missing gets smaller over time," he said. "But it hasn't yet. It doesn't shrink," Emily said. It just you get bigger, and it stays the same size, so after a while it takes up less of the room. Thomas stopped and looked at her. He thought about that for what seemed like a very long time. Then he nodded once with the gravity of someone who has received important information and went back to packing carrots. By the end of the morning, he had packed 2 full boxes with meticulous precision and announced that he wanted to learn what else went in sand. She taught him. The trouble with Henry was different, and she didn't see it coming. Henry was 11 and quiet and watchful, and she had pegged him incorrectly, as it turned out, for the one most likely to come around without incident. He did his chores, he ate her food, he said thank you with consistent politeness. What she hadn't understood until the second week was that the politeness was a wall. She discovered it accidentally on a Wednesday afternoon when she found him in the barn, sitting in the hay, with his knees pulled up, not doing anything that needed doing. His eyes were red, which he was making a determined effort to pretend they weren't. Emily sat down in the hay approximately 6 feet away and said nothing. She'd learned this from her father too. Most people given long enough silence and the right quality of company will say the thing they need to say. Henry lasted about 4 minutes. She had a dress like yours, he said. The gray one. Almost the same color. Emily kept very still. Your mother. Yeah. He scrubbed at his face with the back of his hand, furious at himself. I know you're not. I know it's not the same. I know. Of course it's not, Emily said quietly. I don't look like her. I'm not her. And I wouldn't want you to pretend otherwise, Henry, because that would be an unfair thing to ask of you. He was quiet. What was she like? Emily asked. He looked at her sharply, as if she'd said something unexpected. Most adults, she'd found, avoided asking that question. They worried about opening a wound, rather than understanding that the wound was always open, and being avoided was its own kind of hurt. She was loud, Henry said with a watery, almost laugh. Not mean loud, like, she sang all the time. Even when she was sick toward the end, she'd sing sometimes. These old songs her grandmother taught her. He stopped. Clara knows all of them. She never sings them. Emily looked at her hands. She will, she said. Someday, when it doesn't cost so much. Henry was quiet for a long time. You're not what I thought you'd be, he said. What did you think I'd be? I don't know. Somebody who'd tell us to call her mama right away and rearrange everything, and I don't know. He shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a boy who doesn't want to be seen feeling something. You haven't. No, Emily agreed. I haven't. Why not? Because this is your family, Emily said. I'm learning where I fit in it. That takes time, and it should take time. Anyone who tells you different is not paying proper attention. Henry said nothing for a moment. Then he got up and dusted hay off himself with the brisk efficiency of someone returning to normal operations. I've got to finish with the horses, he said. Of course, Emily said. He got about 4 steps toward the stall, and then he stopped without turning around. The bread you made yesterday, he said, with the rosemary. Yes. That was real good, he said. And then he went to the horses. Emily stayed in the hay for a moment after he left. She had not expected this to be easy. She had known walking up to that stagecoach in Billings that what she was walking toward was hard and would ask something of her. She had been prepared for that. What she had not been prepared for, what she was still 2 weeks in, only beginning to understand, was that it was going to ask her to give things she had packed away so carefully that she'd half forgotten she still had them. The snow came in the 3rd week. Not the first of winter. There had been flurries before, but the first serious snow, the kind that settled in and meant business, and it arrived overnight, so that the world outside was transformed by morning into something white and absolute, and very, very cold. Emily had been expecting it. She'd been watching the sky for days. What she had not been expecting was what came 2 hours after the snow settled in, when Nathan came back from the lower pasture, looking like a man who has been handed news he doesn't know how to carry. 2 more gone, he said. Emily looked up from the bread. And I found the section they came through, he said. It wasn't cut this time. The post was pulled. He held up his hand, and she could see the mark on his palm, where something rough had been gripped hard. Takes 3 men to pull a post like that. It's not one person doing it quietly at night. He's getting less careful, Emily said. Or he's getting more confident. Nathan's voice was tight. Emily, I've got a note coming due in December. $40 to the Coldwater Creek Land Office for the claim fee renewal. If I can't pay it. How much are you short? She asked. He looked at her. You don't have to, Nathan. She used his name deliberately, which she didn't do often, and she saw him register it. How much are you short? A pause. $22. Emily dried her hands. She went to the room off the kitchen. She came back with a small tin that she set on the table between them and opened without ceremony. Nathan looked at the money inside. He looked at Emily. I can't take that. It's not a gift, she said. It's a loan. At no interest, because interest on debt between people who live in the same house is absurd. You can pay me back in spring when the calves are sold. Emily, the alternative, she said steadily, is that Harmon Daly ends up with your land, and I'd like to very much not let that happen. She closed the tin and pushed it toward him. We can discuss the terms if it makes you feel better, but please don't tell me you can't accept this when we both know it's the practical choice. Nathan looked at the tin for a long moment. His jaw worked. There was something happening behind his eyes that she couldn't fully read a man in the process of being seen when he'd believed he was past the point of that being possible. He picked up the tin. Thank you, he said. The words came out rough and deliberate, like something he'd had to find his way to. You're welcome, Emily said. She turned back to her bread. I didn't leave the kitchen right away. She could feel him standing there, finding his footing. I've been thinking, he said finally, about what you said, about the timeline. Yes. I'd like to take it to Everett Cole in town. He's a lawyer, not Daly's man. He's nobody's man, which is why he's still there. If there's a pattern the way you say, there is, Emily said, then he needs to see it. Emily nodded. She didn't say I told you. She didn't need to. But she felt something shift between them in that moment. Something that had been approximate becoming more precise, like a map that suddenly shows the missing roads. The day the trouble became undeniable arrived on a Wednesday. Emily was in the kitchen when she heard the wagon on the road. 2 wagons, which was unusual, and a voice she hadn't heard before carrying clearly in the cold air. Confident. Deliberate. The voice of a man accustomed to rooms going quiet when he speaks. She didn't go to the window. She went to the door. On the yard stood Harmon Daly. He was not what she'd expected from Bess's description of his bad eyes. He was well-dressed, well-fed, with the particular handsomeness of a man who has always had things come to him and has never needed to develop character as a substitute. He had 2 men with her and a third driving the second wagon, which carried nothing but gave the impression of a man who travels with witnesses by preference. Nathan was already outside. He'd come from the barn. Nathan, Daly said, pleasant as summer. I heard you had trouble with the stock. Came to see if there was anything a neighbor could do. We're fine, Nathan said. Daly smiled. His eyes went to Emily in the doorway. They stayed there for a moment, assessing, calculating, reorganizing something. She had seen that look before on her father's creditor cousin, and she recognized it for what it was. This must be your new wife, Daly said. I heard you found someone. Miss Carter, Nathan said. Emily. Mrs. Brooks now, Daly said, and the slight lift on the name was a small, careful thing, just precise enough to land. Emily looked at him steadily. She said, Good morning, Mr. Daly. You settle in all right up here. Mountain winters take getting used to. I manage fine, Emily said. Daly smiled again. He turned back to Nathan. I'll be brief since the weather's turning. I wanted you to know that my offer on the property stands. I know you've had a rough run of it lately, and I'd hate to see you come to the end of your resources and have nowhere to turn. He said it the way you say a kindness, with his voice warm and his eyes doing something else entirely. The offer's a fair one. The property isn't for sale, Nathan said. Course not. Just want you to know the option exists. Daly's eyes went back to Emily. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Brooks. You've got a strong man here. I hope things turn around for you both. He turned and walked back to his wagon. Emily watched him go. He's not offering to help, she said when the wagons were down the road. I know, Nathan said. He came to see how bad things are, she said, and to show you he knows. Nathan was quiet. He knows about the note, Emily said. It wasn't a question. Nathan turned and looked at her. The land office, she said. Who works the desk there? Frank Tillis, Nathan said slowly. And Frank Tillis, Emily said, is he anyone's man? The look on Nathan's face was the look of a man who has understood something he didn't want to understand. He boards at Daly's house, Nathan said. Emily nodded. She went back inside. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hands still and her mind moving. The picture was getting clearer. It had a shape now, and the shape was deliberate and legal and patient, the work of a man who had done this before and knew how to do it without leaving obvious marks. She went to her notebook. She opened it to the timeline, and she added Harmon Daly's visit and the date, and one word beside it, monitoring. She was going to need more than a timeline. She was going to need his records, the actual books, the original transactions, the paper trail that a man like Daly would have been too careful to destroy entirely, because he'd need them himself to prove the debts he claimed were owed. She closed the notebook. She thought about her father's ledgers locked in the trunk at the foot of her bed. She thought about the system he'd used, the double entry method, the way discrepancies showed themselves when you cross-referenced two sets of records instead of one. She thought about what it would take to reconstruct a fraudulent set of accounts from the outside in. It was possible. It was going to require things she didn't yet have access to. But it was possible. Clara appeared in the doorway. She had her coat on, and her expression was controlled in a way that meant she'd been outside when Daly was in the yard and had heard everything. He's done this to other families, Clara said. It wasn't a question either. I believe so, Emily said. Can you prove it? Emily looked at Nathan's oldest daughter, at the 16-year-old who had run this household through grief and crisis and was now standing in her kitchen doorway with her jaw set and her eyes lit with something that was past fear and into fury. I'm working on it, Emily said. Clara came fully into the kitchen. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook. She went to the work table. Tell me what I can do to help, she said. Emily looked at her for a moment. Then she pulled out the notebook and opened it to the first page of the timeline, and she sat down beside Nathan's daughter, and she began to explain. Outside, the snow was still falling. The wind was picking up off the ridge. The road down to Coldwater Creek was getting worse by the hour, and somewhere at the bottom of that mountain, Harmon Daly was going over his own numbers, comfortable in the certainty that time and weather and debt were doing his work for him. He had not yet accounted for the woman with the wooden trunk. He would. The snow did not let up. By the fourth day of it, the road down to Coldwater Creek was impassable for a wagon, and passable on horseback. Only if you were willing to accept that the horse might not agree with you on the subject. Nathan had made the trip once on Tuesday to deliver the timeline notebook to Everett Cole's office. He'd come back in the dark, half frozen, and said only that Cole had read it and asked for more time to review it before he could say anything useful. Emily had nodded and gone back to her calculations. She was running two tracks in her mind, simultaneously, the way her father had taught her to work a complicated case, the medical problem and the financial problem in parallel, because they were almost always connected when you looked closely enough. The medical problem right now was Thomas's cough, which had moved from the dry, cold air variety she'd been managing with steam cloths and honey into something wetter and lower in his chest that she didn't like the sound of. She was watching it. She had her father's notes on childhood respiratory cases open on the kitchen table most evenings, cross-referencing, tracking the progression. The financial problem was Daly's ledgers. She didn't have them. She needed them or something close enough to reconstruct what they said. What she had was her timeline. Nathan's records of his own payments and the growing detailed certainty that Harmon Daly had been running the same scheme on mountain families for years, lending against land, then systematically destroying the borrower's ability to repay until foreclosure became inevitable, then buying the property at distressed prices and reselling it at full value. The mechanism was elegant in the way that a trap is elegant. It required patience, local knowledge, and access to the legal structures that a man of Daly's position could purchase without anyone noticing. The cutting of fences, the spoiled grain, the missing cattle, None of it would stand alone as evidence of anything. But the pattern documented carefully with dates and values and a timeline that connected cause to consequence, that was something different. It was her father would have said the difference between a symptom and a diagnosis. She needed more symptoms, and she needed, if she was going to make the diagnosis stick, someone who had been through this before. "Clara," she said on the 5th morning of snow, "do you know who the Garrity family is?" Clara looked up from the bread she was slicing. "They had a place on the North Ridge, past the Hendersons." She paused. "They're gone now. Sold up 2 years ago and moved to Billings." "Do you know why they sold?" Clara's eyes sharpened. "Papa said they had debt trouble." She set the knife down. "Daly." "I think so," Emily said. "I need to know who else he's done this to. Other families in this valley who sold land or lost claims in the last 5 years under debt circumstances." She looked at Clara steadily. "I need names. And I need, if possible, someone who still has their original loan papers." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Hendricks. Who is she?" "She's a widow. Her husband borrowed from Daly 4 years ago to fix their barn after the fire. He died before it was paid off, and she kept the farm. Barely." Clara's expression was complicated. "She's stubborn. Papa says she's the most stubborn woman on this mountain." "Good," Emily said. "I need stubborn right now." She looked at Nathan, who had come in from checking the stock and was standing in the kitchen doorway with snow still on his coat. "Can we get to the Hendricks place on horseback?" Nathan looked at her. He had stopped being surprised by her questions approximately a week ago, which she considered progress. "In this weather, tomorrow," she said, "if it eases." He looked at the window. The snow was still coming, but lighter than it had been. "Might ease by morning," he said. "Why Hendricks?" "Because she may have paper that proves Daly's pattern," Emily said. "And because if she does, she's not the only one." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled off his coat and hung it up and came to the table and sat down, and Emily understood that this was his way, not words of agreement, but presence. He sat, and his sitting meant all, she told him. By the time she finished, Clara was sitting at the table too, and William had come in from the barn and stood in the doorway, listening with his arms crossed, and the kitchen was full of that particular quality of attention that a family gives when it understands that what's being said matters. "So you need her papers," William said. "And then what?" "Then I need to reconstruct what Daly's books should look like if his interest calculations were honest," Emily said. "And show what they actually say by implication from the payments Nathan made, from the Hendricks payments, from any other records we can find. I can demonstrate the fraud mathematically, but I need the raw numbers." "And then," William said. "Then we need a federal marshal," Emily said. "Because a local marshal won't touch Harmon Daly. A federal one might." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's a long way from a cut fence and some missing cattle," Nathan said. "It is," Emily agreed. "But that's where this ends, Nathan. It ends with Daly in front of someone with the authority to make him stop. Or it ends with him taking this land." She looked at him directly. "I don't intend to let it end the second way." Nathan held her gaze. "All right," he said. "We go to Hendricks tomorrow." They did not go to Hendricks tomorrow. What happened instead was Thomas. Emily woke at 3 in the morning to the sound that every person who has spent time in proximity to a sick child learns to wake to the particular quality of a cough that has crossed a line in the night, moved from manageable into something that requires immediate full attention. She was out of her bed and into Thomas's room before she was fully conscious. I was sitting up, which was how she'd left him propped, but he'd slid down the pillows and the steam cloth had gone cold, and he was working for air in a way that made her chest go tight. His face was flushed. His small hands were clenched in the blanket. "Emily," he said when he saw her. Just her name, with the complete trust of a sick child for the person they believe can fix things. "I'm here," she said. She put her hand on his forehead. First, the heat was significant, more than she'd expected, and then her ear to his chest, listening the way her father had taught her before stethoscopes reached the frontier. The left side, wet and heavy. She straightened. She did not allow her face to show what she was thinking. "You're going to be just fine," she told Thomas. But I need to do a few things, and I need you to sit very still and let me work. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, clutching his blanket. She went to the trunk. She had not opened it, not fully, since she'd arrived. She'd taken a few things from the top: her notebook, her father's agricultural manual, the small tin of savings. The rest she had left undisturbed. It was not superstition exactly. More like she had not yet been certain she was staying. And the things at the bottom of that trunk were the things she'd been most careful with, the most private, the most irreplaceable. She knelt and unlocked it now. She went past the notebooks, years of her father's handwriting, dense and precise and organized in a way that had shaped every habit of her mind. Past the small surgical kit in its leather roll. Past the financial ledgers she hadn't needed yet. She found the medicinal section, the sealed glass bottles her father had labeled in his meticulous hand, the dried herb parcels wrapped in waxed paper, the thin medical reference he'd compiled himself from 15 years of practice that she'd read so many times she could recite half of it. She found the eucalyptus oil, the camphor, the willow bark packets. She brought them to Thomas's room, and she rebuilt the steam setup with the kettle and a towel, and she added the eucalyptus in careful measure, and she propped him correctly, and she sat on the edge of his bed and began the first of what would be many hours of close monitoring. Nathan appeared in the doorway at 3:30. He looked at Thomas, at the steam rising from the bowl, at the collection of things from Emily's trunk arranged on the small dresser. He did not ask questions. He said, "What do you need?" "Fresh water," Emily said. "Kept hot. And I need the second kettle from the kitchen. And Nathan." She looked up at him. "I need you to tell me honestly. How far is Dr. Marsh?" Nathan's face changed. 3 days in this weather. Maybe 4. She had known. She had hoped she was wrong. "All right," she said. "We don't need him tonight. But I'm going to need your help to manage this because I can't leave Thomas alone, and there are things that need watching." Nathan came into the room and sat in the chair by the wall and looked at his youngest son. Something moved through his expression. Fear briefly, and then the same quality she'd seen in him since she arrived. The determination to not be beaten by the next hard thing, even when the next hard thing was very hard indeed. "Tell me what to do," he said. Emily told him. They worked through the night in the way of people who have found a common purpose, efficiently, quietly, without wasted motion or words. She monitored Thomas. Nathan kept the water hot and spelled her watching when she needed to move, and somewhere around 5 in the morning she made a cup of tea without asking and put it at Nathan's elbow, and he drank it without comment. And when she looked at him an hour later, his free hand was resting on Thomas's small blanketed foot, just resting there, maintaining contact in the way of parents who need to be able to feel that their child is still present. By morning the fever had eased. Not gone, but down meaningfully. Thomas opened his eyes fully at 7 and said with threadbare dignity, "I'm hungry." The breath Nathan let out was not quite steady. "Good sign," Emily said. "Yeah," Nathan said. His voice was rough. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, it is." Clara appeared in the doorway and took one look at Thomas sitting up asking for food and closed her eyes briefly with the expression of someone absorbing a relief they'd been afraid to feel. "I'll make broth," she said. "I'll make it," Emily said. "Stay with him." Clara sat on the edge of Thomas's bed and took his hand, and Emily went to the kitchen, and she stood at the stove for a moment before she started, just a moment, with her hands on the cold iron and her eyes closed. She had known she could manage it. She had believed working through the night that she would be able to bring the fever down without the doctor and keep the lung clear of the worst of it. She had believed it because her father had taught her to believe in competence, in preparation, in the right knowledge applied at the right moment. But believing and knowing were two different countries, and right now, with Thomas asking for food and his fever down, and Clara holding his hand in the next room, she was standing at the border between them, feeling the distance close. She put the broth on. She let herself have exactly 1 more minute. Then she went back to work. The storm broke 2 days later. The sky cleared overnight into the particular blue-white that follows a hard snow, and by morning the cold was savage and clean, and the road was at least theoretically passable. Emily and Nathan went to Hendricks. Martha Hendricks was 61 years old and had the physical economy of a woman who had never spent energy on anything that didn't require it. She received them in her kitchen without apparent surprise, which Emily suspected meant she received most people in her kitchen without surprise, because the kitchen was where the real business of life happened. She poured coffee without asking if they wanted it. She set bread on the table. She looked at Emily with the direct assessment eyes of a woman who had outlasted a great many things and was prepared to outlast several more. "Nathan Brooks," she said, "haven't seen you come down this road since summer." She looked at Emily. "This is the woman from the advertisement." "My wife," Nathan said. "Emily." Martha Hendricks looked at Emily for a full 5 seconds. Emily looked back. "You've got your father's eyes," the older woman said. Emily blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Dr. Carter, from Billings." Martha poured her own coffee. "He came up here twice, maybe 3 years back, to see Frank when Frank had the lung sickness." She sat down. "You've got his way of looking at things, like you're already figuring out what's wrong." "He was my father," Emily said. Martha nodded once as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Good man," she said. "Knew his work." She looked at Nathan. "What do you need?" Nathan said. "Emily needs to ask you something." Martha looked at Emily. Emily set her coffee down. "Mrs. Hendricks, I believe Harmon Daly has been deliberately destroying the financial stability of mountain families in this valley in order to force them into foreclosure and acquire their land at distressed prices. I believe he's done it to you, to Nathan, and to at least several other families whose land he now owns. And I believe the only way to stop him before he takes Nathan's ranch is to demonstrate the pattern using original financial documents." She kept her voice level. "I need to know if you still have your original loan papers from Daly, and I need to know if you'd be willing to let me examine them." Martha Hendricks was quiet for a long time. She drank her coffee. She looked out her window. Then she stood up and went to the back of the house, and they heard a drawer open and close, and she came back with a bundle of papers tied with kitchen string and set them on the table between Nathan and Emily. "I've been waiting," Martha said, "for somebody to ask that question for 2 years." Emily untied the string. The papers were exactly what she'd hoped for, and worse than she'd feared. She spread them on the table with careful hands and began to read, and within 3 minutes she had found the first falsified calculation, an interest rate listed in the body of the agreement at 8%, but applied in the payment schedule at 11.5%. It was done in 2 different handwritings. The number changed in a small amendment that a person unfamiliar with accounting would almost certainly have missed. "He changed the rate after Frank signed," Emily said. Martha said flatly, "I know." "You knew." "I knew it didn't add up," Martha said. "I'm not a bookkeeper, but I was married to a man who was careful with numbers, and I looked at those papers after he died, and I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know how to say what kind of wrong it was." Emily looked at her. "This is fraud, Mrs. Hendricks. What he did to these papers is a federal offense, if I can document it properly with cross-referenced records." "There are others," Martha said. Emily went very still. "I beg your pardon. There are others." Martha sat back down. "The Garrittys. The Plummer family on the east side, they lost their claim 3 years ago. The Winfields. All of them borrowed from Daly. All of them lost land." She looked at Emily steadily. "I've been collecting what I could. Pieces. Nothing that proves anything on its own." "Do you have the pieces here?" Emily asked. Martha stood up again. "I'll be a minute," she said. She was 20 minutes. When she came back, she set a box on the table that was not small. Inside it were letters, payment receipts, partial records, folded papers with the Daily Land and Loan letterhead that Emily recognized from Nathan's own correspondence. Emily looked at the box. She looked at Nathan. I was looking at the box with an expression that was half shock and half something older and harder. The look of a man realizing that the thing he thought was happening to him specifically was something systemic, something larger, something that had been running long before he walked into it. "How long have you been collecting this?" he said to Martha. "Since Frank died," Martha said. 18 months. The ride back up the mountain was cold and fast and quiet. Emily had the box strapped to the saddle behind her, tied down carefully, and she was already organizing in her mind what she had, what she needed, what the reconstruction would require, and how long it would take. She had a week, maybe less, before Daly moved on Nathan's claim renewal. 1 week to build a case that would hold. She was still calculating when Nathan said, without turning from the trail, "You knew she'd have something." "I hoped," Emily said. "How?" "Because she's still here," Emily said. "She kept the farm when everyone expected her to lose it. People who manage that don't do it by accident. They do it by holding on to everything that might be useful later." She paused. "My father called it survival intelligence, the kind you can't teach. You either have it or you don't." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Do I have it?" "You've kept 6 children alive on a mountain in Montana for 18 months as a widower, while someone was systematically taking your cattle and cutting your fences," Emily said. "What do you think?" Something shifted in his shoulders, not quite a laugh, but close. They rode the rest of the way in silence. But it was a different silence than the one she'd ridden up in 3 weeks ago. Warmer, somehow more specific. The silence of 2 people who have found a shared language and are comfortable enough not to use it every moment. They were 2 miles from the ranch when Nathan stopped his horse. Emily pulled up beside him. He was looking at the tree line to the east. His body had gone very still. "Nathan," she said. "Smoke," he said. She looked. There was a thin column rising above the eastern ridge, not the pale, dispersed smoke of a chimney, but the darker, fuller column of something that was burning that shouldn't be. "That's the direction of the east pasture shelter," Nathan said. He put his heels to his horse before she could respond. She followed. The shelter was a small structure Nathan used for emergency livestock protection in hard weather, basic functional wood frame and a solid roof. Or it had been. By the time they reached it, the roof was mostly gone. The walls were still standing, but blackened, the interior hollow and smoking, and the snow around it in a ring was mashed with boot prints, multiple sets, not Nathan's workers, not any of his children. He stood looking at it without speaking. Emily got down from her horse and crouched by the nearest set of prints. They were clear in the snow, large boots, multiple men, the prints of people who had not been in any hurry. Because they had not needed to hurry. They had known no one was home. Nathan said very quietly, "He knew we went to Hendricks." Emily stood. The cold was significant. She could feel it through her coat now in the places where shock suppresses sensation and then stops doing so. "Tillis," she said, "at the land office. If he's Daly's man and Daly's been watching—" "He has people watching the road," Nathan said. "He knew when we came down, and he knew when we'd be back." His jaw was a hard line. "This isn't a warning. This is him telling me he can do what he wants on my land and there's nothing I can do about it." "He thinks we have nothing," Emily said. Nathan looked at her. "Do we?" Emily thought about the box strapped to her saddle. She thought about Martha Hendricks and her 18 months of careful, patient collection. She thought about the falsified interest rate in 2 different handwritings on a legal document that bore Harmon Daly's personal seal. "We have enough to start," she said. "But Nathan, we need to move faster than I planned. If he's willing to burn property, he's escalating. He's not going to wait for the claim renewal." Nathan looked at the smoking ruin of the shelter. Something moved through his face, not defeat, she thought. Something past the point of defeat where the ground gets very solid underfoot because there's nothing left to lose. "What do we do?" he said. "Tonight I work on the ledgers," Emily said. "All night if I need to. And tomorrow you take what I give you to Everett Cole. Not to discuss, to file." She held his gaze. "And Cole needs to contact the federal marshal's office in Helena, today if he can manage it." "Cole might not." "He will," Emily said. "Because I'm going to give him something he can take to Helena that makes it worth his career to try." She looked at the box on her saddle. "Trust me." Nathan held her gaze for a moment. "I do," he said. He said it the way he said most important things, quietly, without decoration, as a simple statement of fact. But she heard it, and she filed it in the place where she kept things that mattered, and she looked away before either of them had to decide what to do with it. They rode home. The children were at the door. Thomas was up, which he shouldn't have been, but he was up and dressed and his color was better, and he was holding Clara's hand in the doorway, with the expression of a child who had decided that staying in bed was no longer a reasonable option. You were gone a long time, he said. We had business, Nathan said. He got down from his horse and went to Thomas and picked him up, not in the dramatic way, not making it a thing, just picked him up as if he were going to carry him back inside, which he was. Thomas looked over Nathan's shoulder at Emily. Did you get what you needed? He asked. Emily unstrapped the box from her saddle. I think so, she said. She carried it inside. She set it on the kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at Clara, who had followed her in, and was reading her face with that particular 16-year-old precision. It's going to be a long night, Emily said. I'll make coffee, Clara said. Make it strong, Emily said. She sat down. She opened the box. She pulled out the first of Martha Hendricks's careful, patient documents, and she placed it beside Nathan's own records, and she picked up her pen, and she began. Outside the cold had teeth. The mountain held its breath. And inside the kitchen by lamplight with Clara's coffee at her elbow, and the locked trunk at the foot of her bed, waiting for the moment when it would finally give up the last of what it held. Emily Carter built the case that was going to either save this family or break everything she had left to give. She intended it to be the former. She did not intend to stop until it was. She worked through the night. Clara stayed up with her until past midnight, refilling the coffee and cross-referencing dates when Emily called them out, her handwriting steady and careful beside Emily's on the second copy of the timeline they were building. At some point, Nathan came back downstairs and sat at the far end of the table without explanation, and Emily didn't ask for one. He was there. That was enough. By 1 a.m, she had the first complete reconstruction, Nathan's loan payment by payment with Daly's claimed interest rate set against what the actual rate should have produced. The discrepancy over 18 months was $43. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to demonstrate in precise arithmetic that the numbers had been altered. By 3, she had the Hendricks reconstruction beside it. The discrepancy there was $61 over 3 years. Different amounts. Different timelines, same mechanism, same handwriting on the alteration. That was the piece that made her breath stop for a moment. Same handwriting. She set both documents side by side under the lamp and looked at the alterations, the small notations changing the interest rates, the cramped backward slanting additions that didn't match the clean hand of the original agreements, and they were identical. Not similar. Identical. The same person had altered both documents. Nathan, she said. He looked up from the table. He'd been half asleep, she thought, but he came alert immediately. Come look at this, she said. He came around the table and stood behind her left shoulder, and she pointed the alteration in Nathan's papers, then the same mark in the Hendricks papers, the same cramped hand, the same backward slanting numeral 7. Nathan stared at them. Same person, he said. Same person, Emily confirmed. Which means this isn't a coincidence of Daly's accounting practices. Someone in his employ, or under his direction, has been systematically altering loan documents after signing. That's not negligence. That's not even aggressive business. That's Nathan. That's a criminal conspiracy. Clara, who had been listening from her chair, said very quietly, That's enough to take to the marshal. It's enough to take to Cole first thing in the morning, Emily said. And Cole needs to take it to the marshal with a formal complaint. Because if Nathan walks into the marshal's office alone with these papers, Daly will have the paperwork challenged before the week is out. It needs to go through a lawyer. It needs to go on record before Daly knows it exists. Nathan straightened. His jaw was set. I'll ride at first light. Take William, Emily said. Don't go alone. He looked at her. I'm serious, she said. He knows we went to Hendricks. He burned the shelter to show us he's watching. Don't give him a target on a single rider. Nathan held her gaze for a moment. You think he'd... I think he spent 3 months engineering reasons for you to lose this land, and he just burned your property, Emily said. I'm not making assumptions about what he would or wouldn't do. Nathan nodded slowly. All right. William and me. First light. Clara stood up and gathered the coffee cups. She was 16, and she had been awake past midnight cross-referencing financial documents for a fraud case against the most powerful man in the valley, and she did it with the steadiness of someone a decade older. Emily watched her and felt something that wasn't quite pride, more like recognition. Like seeing a shape you know in a different context, and understanding you are looking at the same essential thing. Clara, she said. Clara paused. You did good work tonight, Emily said simply. Clara looked at her for a moment. Her expression was complicated in the way of someone who wants to receive a kindness and isn't yet certain they trust the hands offering it. Then she said, You should sleep, even 2 hours. I will, Emily said. Go on. Clara went upstairs. Nathan lingered. He stood at the edge of the kitchen with his hands at his sides and his face doing the quiet interior work that she was learning to read, not perfectly, but well enough to know when he was building towards something he didn't know how to say directly. You've been up since 3 yesterday morning, he said. Thomas needed watching. He's better. He is, she agreed. But he wasn't at 3 yesterday morning. Nathan was quiet. You didn't have to do that, he said. Sit with him all night. Yes, I did, Emily said. Emily. Nathan. She looked at him directly the way she'd learned he needed not the soft approach, but the straight one. That child is 4 years old, and he was scared and sick, and you were downstairs worrying yourself into the floor. Someone needed to be with him. That was my job, and I was glad to do it. She paused. Stop trying to thank me for things that don't require thanks. Something moved through his expression. My wife used to say something like that, he said. Then he stopped himself as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Emily said nothing. She gave it the space it needed. She'd have liked you, Nathan said quietly. She didn't have much patience for ceremony. She'd have sat up all night with Thomas and then argued with me about being thanked for it. A pause. She was stubborn that way. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Emily said. She was. He looked at the table. I don't say that enough to the children. I think I got so used to carrying it myself that I stopped. He cut off. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because it's 3 in the morning and you're tired and you've been holding it a long time, Emily said. Those are sufficient reasons. He looked at her. She looked back. Get some sleep, she said. You need to ride at first light and I need you functional. The corner of his mouth moved. Yes, ma'am, he said, and the ma'am had something different in it than it had a month ago. Something warmer, she thought. More deliberate. He went upstairs. She sat alone in the kitchen for a moment in the silence of a sleeping house, and she looked at the 2 sets of documents side by side on the table, and she thought about the backward slanting numeral 7 and what it was going to mean for Harmon Daly when a federal marshal saw it. Then she made herself lie down for 2 hours. She was up before Nathan. Nathan and William rode out at first light with the documents in a leather satchel that Emily had oilskin wrapped against the weather. She stood at the door and watched them go, and she registered not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that the sight of Nathan Brooks riding out on that road did something to the space under her ribs that was not strictly practical in nature, and that she was not yet ready to examine directly. She went back inside and made breakfast for 4 children. The day was long and the particular way of days, when you are waiting for news you cannot control. Emily managed it the way she managed most things she couldn't control, by doing what she could with what was in front of her. She finished the second copy of the reconstruction with Bess, surprisingly acting as her assistant, handing documents in the order. Emily pointed to them with a seriousness that made Henry raise his eyebrows. She put 2 more boxes of root vegetables in sand. She mixed the medicinal compounds she'd been meaning to prepare since Thomas got sick, the camphor-based chest rub and the willow bark tincture, and stored them in labeled jars from her father's kit. Thomas, sitting up in bed and considerably improved, demanded to know what was in every jar. She told him. He took this information with the gravity of a future physician. Henry came to find her mid-afternoon. She was in the kitchen going over the last of Martha Hendricks's documents, and he stood in the doorway with the look she'd come to recognize, the slightly sideways approach of a boy who has something to say and hasn't decided how. Is it bad? He said. What Daly's doing? Are we going to lose the ranch? Emily set down her pen. She looked at him directly because Henry was 11 and he had been managing his fear quietly for weeks, and he deserved a straight answer. I don't know for certain, she said. What I know is that I'm doing everything I can to prevent it, and what I've found gives us a real chance. A good chance. Not a guarantee I won't lie to you about that, but a genuine solid chance. Henry absorbed this. What if it's not enough? If it's not enough, Emily said, then I will find another way. That's not stubbornness. That's just there's always another way, Henry. You just have to be willing to look for it past the point where most people stop looking. He was quiet for a moment. Papa says you're the most capable person he's ever met. Emily stopped. He said that, she said. Last night, Henry said. When he thought I was asleep, he was telling William. He shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a boy who understands what he's just disclosed and has decided to commit to it anyway. Thought you should know. He went back upstairs. Emily sat with that for a moment alone in her kitchen, and she permitted herself exactly the amount of feeling the moment warranted, which was considerable, and then she went back to the documents. Nathan and William came back at dusk. She heard the horses in the yard before she heard the door, and she made herself finish the sentence she was writing before she turned around, because she had learned that if you stopped every time you heard a sound, you would never get anything finished. She turned when Nathan came through the door. He looked at her. His face was composed, but there was something behind his eyes that she couldn't immediately read, something tightly held that needed a moment to resolve. Cole filed it, he said. Emily stood. He filed a formal complaint with the federal marshal's office, Nathan said. The documents, the reconstruction, Martha's papers, all of it. He paused, and this was when she saw that the thing behind his eyes was not bad news, but something adjacent to relief that was so unfamiliar to him, he didn't quite know what to do with it. He had a contact in Helena, a federal marshal named Briggs, who Cole says has been looking for exactly this kind of paper trail on Daly for 2 years. 2 years, Emily said. Daly's operation is bigger than this valley, Nathan said. Cole thinks it goes into at least 3 counties, maybe more. He came fully into the kitchen and set his hat on the table and ran his hand through his hair. Briggs is coming. Cole says he'll be here in 4 days. 4 days. Emily let out a breath. William came in behind his father and looked at Emily with the expression of a 14-year-old boy who has spent a day watching adults do important things and is still processing the scale of it. Cole said, William offered that the reconstruction you did, he said it was the cleanest accounting work he'd seen outside a professional firm. Cole is kind, Emily said. Cole's not kind, Nathan said. Cole doesn't do kind, he does accurate. He looked at her steadily. He meant it. She turned back to the stove. Supper will be ready in 20 minutes, she said, because the moment had gotten large and she needed to do something practical with her hands. Behind her, she heard Nathan sit down at the table. She heard the familiar sound of him not leaving. Emily, he said. 20 minutes, she said. That's not what I was going to say. She turned. I was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the weighing look, not the tired look, not the look of a man calculating risk. Something more direct than any of those. Thank you, he said. And before you tell me this doesn't require thanks, I know that's how you see it, but I'm going to say it anyway because some things need to be said out loud, even if you know them. He held her gaze. You came up this mountain a month ago and you changed what this family is going to be. And I want you to know that I see it, He stopped. He looked at his hands briefly. That I'm glad you answered that advertisement. Emily looked at him for a long moment. So am I, she said quietly. It was not a complicated answer, but it was an honest one. And in the kitchen of the Brooks Ranch at the end of a very long day on a mountain in Montana, honest was the most important thing either of them had. She turned back to the stove. He stayed at the table. The 4 days passed with the particular tension of waiting. When you know the waiting is finite, but cannot make it go faster. Emily worked. She always worked when she was anxious. It was a habit, so deeply seated she no longer recognized it as a coping mechanism. It simply was the shape of her days when things were difficult. She taught Bess and Thomas how to make butter properly because the children needed to know, and because the rhythm of the churning was good for concentration. She went over the account books with Clara teaching her the double entry method because Clara was going to be running her own household in not very many years, and she deserved to know how to protect herself from exactly the kind of fraud Daly had been running. Clara absorbed this information with an intensity that suggested she was thinking about more than accounting. On the third day, she said without looking up from the ledger page, "If I wanted to learn more the medicine part, from your father's books." Emily looked at her. "I'm not asking to be a doctor," Clara said quickly. I know. But the things you did for Thomas, knowing what to do when there's no doctor, knowing the difference between a cough that's manageable and a cough that..." She stopped. "Mama had a cough for 3 months before we knew it was serious," she said. Her voice was level. "I want to know the difference." Emily was quiet for a moment. "After this is over," she said carefully, "when we have time, I'll teach you everything I know, all of it." Clara looked at her fully then. Something in her face had gone quiet and very still, the way faces go when they've been given something they wanted so much they'd stopped permitting themselves to want it. "All right," Clara said. She went back to the ledger. Emily went back to her work. Marshal Briggs arrived on the 4th day, which was a Wednesday, in the company of a deputy and Everett Cole, who had ridden from Coldwater Creek in weather that had not improved his disposition but had apparently not diminished his determination. How was a compact, gray-haired man, with the careful movements of someone who has spent 20 years in situations where careless movements had consequences. He shook Nathan's hand, shook Emily's declined coffee, and sat at the kitchen table and opened the satchel Cole had brought. He read for a long time. Nobody talked. Thomas sat on the stairs where he'd been told not to sit and watched the proceedings with enormous eyes. Emily had decided not to tell him to move because the stairs were warm and he was still recovering, and if she told him to move, he would simply move somewhere she couldn't see him, and she preferred the situation she had. Finally, Briggs looked up. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "this reconstruction, you did this work yourself." "I did," Emily said. "Your methodology, the cross-referencing of implied rates against actual payments, that's not a standard lay approach." "My father was a physician and accountant," she said. "I worked beside him for 15 years. Briggs looked at her for a moment longer than strictly necessary. The handwriting analysis comparing the alterations across documents. "You're confident." "I'm confident they match," Emily said. "I'm not a professional document examiner, but the characteristics are consistent across 8 separate alterations in 4 different loan agreements. That's not coincidence." "No," Briggs agreed. He looked at Cole. "I need to know who else has papers." "Martha Hendricks is prepared to testify," Emily said. "She has 18 months of collected documentation, and she has been waiting for someone to ask." Briggs made a note. "Other families. The Garrity's are in Billings," Nathan said. "The Plumbers lost their claim 3 years ago. We believe they still have their original papers." "I'll need to speak with all of them," Briggs said. He looked at the documents again. "Mr. Brooks, you understand that even with all of this, Daly is going to fight it. He has money and he has lawyers, and he's been doing this long enough to have contingency plans." "I understand," Nathan said. "And the property claim renewal, the $40 note?" "Paid," Nathan said. 10 days ago." Briggs nodded. "Good. That eliminates his most immediate avenue." He set the papers together carefully and looked at Emily. "I'm going to need a formal sworn statement from you describing your methodology and your findings, today if possible." "I can do that now," Emily said. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her and dipped her pen, and she began to write the thing that was going to end Harmon Daly's operation in Coldwater Creek Valley, in the careful, precise hand her father had taught her, with the language of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and why. She had been writing for 20 minutes when the sound reached them. Horses on the road, more than 2 coming up fast. Nathan was at the window before anyone spoke. "3 riders," he said. His voice had gone flat and careful. "Daly's man Caldwell is one of them." The kitchen went very still. Briggs stood up from the table with no apparent urgency and said, "Cole." Cole moved to the door. Briggs looked at Emily. "Keep writing," he said quietly. Emily kept writing. She heard Nathan go to the door. She heard the exchange in the yard. Caldwell's voice, broad and confident, the voice of a man who has not yet realized the situation has changed. "Delivering papers," he said, "from Mr. Daly, regarding the land claim renewal. Said the payment was disputed. Said the land office had concerns about the validity." Nathan's voice low and steady. "You can take those papers back to Daly." "Mr. Brooks, with respect." Briggs's voice from the doorway. "This is U.S. Marshal Thomas Briggs out of Helena. I'm going to need those papers, and I'm going to need the names of everyone Harmon Daly sent to deliver them." The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. Emily kept writing. She heard Caldwell's horse shift. She heard low voices. She heard the particular sound of a man recalculating. Then she heard horses leaving. Fast. Nathan came back inside. His face was controlled in the way of a man managing a significant feeling with great effort. "They ran," William said from the staircase where he had apparently migrated at some point to join Thomas. "They went to tell Daly," Nathan said. "Good," Briggs said, sitting back down at the table. He said it with the calm satisfaction of a man who has just arranged exactly the situation he wanted. "Let him know we're here. Let him think about what he does next. It'll tell me something useful about his judgment." Emily set down her pen. "I've finished the statement," she said. Briggs took it from her. He read it. He read it again. Then he looked up and he said, "Mrs. Brooks, in 20 years as a federal marshal, I have received sworn statements from witnesses, professionals, and sworn officers of the court. This," he held up the pages, "this is among the clearest, most precisely organized documents I've received from anyone." He looked at Nathan. "Your wife is a formidable woman, Mr. Brooks." Nathan looked at Emily. The look was not the weighing look. It was something simpler and more specific, and she felt it land somewhere in her chest and stay there. "I know," Nathan said. "What happened over the following 48 hours was the legal equivalent of a landslide, the kind that begins with a single shift and then moves with a momentum that cannot be reversed." Briggs rode to the Hendricks farm and spent 2 hours with Martha and came back with a stack of documents and an expression that said he had received confirmation of everything he'd already believed. Cole sent a rider to the Plummer family in Billings, 3 families who had sold their land to Daly at distressed prices and who had believed for years that they'd simply been unlucky, received visits from the deputy marshal that left them sitting at their kitchen tables with expressions of stunned recognition. The expression of people understanding that what happened to them had a name and a remedy: Daly. Meanwhile, did what men of his type do when they understand the game is up: he moved his assets. The deputy intercepted a wire to his Billings bank on Thursday morning. Briggs had anticipated it, which is why the deputy had been watching the telegraph office since Wednesday. It was Cole who came to tell them, riding up the mountain in the afternoon cold, with something in his face that Emily had not yet seen there. A grim, satisfied quality. The look of a man who has been in the right for a long time and is watching it finally matter. He came into the kitchen and stood at the table and said without ceremony, "Daly's been arrested." The kitchen was silent. Thomas said from his chair, "What's arrested mean?" "It means," William said with barely contained feeling, "that he's in jail." "At the county level," Cole said. "But the federal charges are being prepared. The wire interception alone is enough to hold him. The document fraud." He shook his head. "He's not getting out from under this." Clara made a sound, just a small one, quickly controlled, but Emily heard it. Bess said, "Does this mean nobody's going to take our house?" Nathan, who had been standing very still since Cole walked in, crouched down to Bess's level. "Nobody's taking our house," he said. Bess looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Good," with the matter-of-fact finality of a child closing a chapter, and went back to the bread dough Emily had set her to working. Nathan stood up. He looked across the kitchen at Emily. She looked back at him. There was a great deal in that look that neither of them was ready to say yet, and they both knew it, and they both let it be, which was, she had learned the way. Nathan Brooks handled most things that mattered to him carefully, without rushing, with a patience that was not passivity, but its own form of certainty. Cole was still talking. The legal details, the timeline, the formal restoration of property claims, the families who would need to be notified. Emily listened and answered when she needed to, and kept one part of her attention on the room around her, on Thomas eating his afternoon bread with the focused dedication of a boy, making up for lost appetite on Bess's hands, in the dough on Henry, pretending to read a book by the fire, while clearly listening to every word on William standing at the window, with his arms crossed and his jaw working and his eyes bright. On Clara, who had sat down in her usual chair and was looking at nothing in particular with an expression Emily had not seen from her before. Not the careful, controlled expression. Not the grief-tightened one. Something softer. Something that looked tentatively like the beginning of a breath held for a very long time, finally beginning to release. When Cole left, Nathan walked him to the horses, and Emily stood at the kitchen window and watched them, the short conversation, the handshake. The way Nathan stood in the yard after Cole rode out his hands in his coat pockets, his face turned slightly toward the mountain. Clara came to stand beside her. "He's been scared," Clara said. "For months. He hides it because of us. But I know what it looks like." "Yes," Emily said. "He's not scared right now," Clara said. Emily looked at Nathan in the yard. "No," she agreed. "He's not." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother would have been glad that you came." She said it simply, looking out the window. She always said he needed someone who could, she said he needed someone who could argue back, because he gets stuck in his own head otherwise. A pause. "You argue back." "I do," Emily agreed. "It's good," Clara said. "I think it's good." She went back to the kitchen table. Emily stayed at the window a moment longer, watching Nathan turn from the mountain and start back toward the house. And she thought about the trunk at the foot of her bed, about what was left in it, what was still packed away, what had been waiting to be unpacked for 8 months, because she hadn't found the place where it belonged. She thought about Thomas asking for food, about Henry and the rosemary bread, about Bess deciding in a single moment, with a single nod, that Emily was someone worth trusting. She thought about Clara saying she wanted to learn medicine. Nathan came through the door. He knocked the snow from his boots and hung his coat and looked up and found her watching him from across the kitchen. "You should eat something," she said. "You haven't since breakfast." "You sound like Clara," he said. "Clara's right," Emily said. He came to the table and sat down, and she put a plate in front of him, and she sat across from him while he ate, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was fine, which was actually exactly right. The mountain held its winter silence around the house. The fire moved in the hearth. The children were where they were supposed to be fed and warm and present, and the trunk at the foot of Emily's bed sat quiet in the small room off the kitchen, waiting for the moment she was finally ready. She was close now. She could feel it. The way you feel a season turning before it actually turns, in the quality of the light, in the specific way the cold changes against your skin. She was very close to ready. The news traveled down the mountain faster than anyone expected. By the following morning, Coldwater Creek knew. By the afternoon, the valley knew. And by the end of the week, the knowing had changed shape the way knowing always does, when it involves a powerful man being publicly wrong, and people who had said nothing for years began saying things. Martha Hendricks was the first to come up the mountain. She arrived on horseback with 2 other women. Emily didn't recognize, each of them carrying something: a wrapped parcel, a covered pot, a basket with a cloth over the top. She came through the door without ceremony and set her parcel on the kitchen table and looked at Emily with the direct, unsentimental expression of a woman who has decided something and is executing it. "Smoked venison," she said. "The Calloway sisters brought preserves and salt pork. We've got 3 other families coming up tomorrow." She looked around the kitchen. "You're going to need shelf space." Emily stared at her. "Mrs. Hendricks." "You spent a night building the case that got my Frank's name cleared," Martha said. "Don't thank me for venison. It's an insult to the venison." Clara made a sound from the doorway that was unmistakably a laugh, brief and quickly covered, but real. The first one Emily had heard from her that wasn't attached to something the children said. It was a remarkable sound. Nathan came in from the barn to find his kitchen occupied by 4 women and a collection of provisions that had materially improved their winter situation in the span of 20 minutes. He stood in the doorway and looked at Emily, and she looked back at him, and she could see him processing the scale of it, the significance of neighbors coming up that road with food and goodwill instead of suspicion. "Ma'am," he said to Martha with his hat in his hand. "Nathan Brooks," Martha said. "Your wife saved this valley. Try to look less surprised about it." Nathan looked at Emily. "She has a point," Emily said. He put his hat back on and went back to the barn, but she saw his shoulders, and they were different. The particular weight that had lived in them since she arrived on that mountain, the held embrace of a man accustomed to carrying things alone, was not gone. But it was lighter, measurably lighter, and she filed that away in the place where she kept things that mattered. The families came the next day, as Martha had said they would. The Hendersons brought flour and dried corn. The Calloways came with 2 laying hens in a crate and seeds for spring planting. Good seeds carefully stored, better than anything Nathan had managed to hold back through the difficult autumn. An older man named Asa Greer, who had lost his son's claim to Daly 3 years prior, and never understood how, sat at the kitchen table with Nathan for 2 hours, going over the reconstruction Emily had built. And by the end, he was sitting very still with his hands flat on the table and his eyes wet. "I thought Jonah had just been careless," Asa said. "I thought he'd borrowed more than he understood." "He didn't," Emily said. "The rate was altered after he signed. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't his fault." Asa was quiet for a long time. "He went to Colorado," Asa said, "after he lost the place. Said he couldn't stay in a valley where everyone knew he'd failed." He looked at the papers. "He didn't fail." "No," Emily said. "He didn't." Asa looked at her. He was a weathered man 70 if he was a day, and there was a grief in his face that had been living there long enough to have settled into the structure of it. "Can I—" He stopped. "Can I take a copy of this to send to him?" Emily had already made a second copy the night before. She didn't know why exactly, except that her father had always told her to make 2 of anything important, because the important things had a way of being needed twice. She slid it across the table. Asa folded it carefully and put it in his coat. He stood up and shook Nathan's hand, and then he turned to Emily, and he took her hand in both of his. The grip of a very old man, and very deliberate, and he said, "Your father raised you right, young woman." Emily's throat tightened. "He did his best," she said. "His best was considerable," Asa said. He left. Emily stood at the window and watched him go, and she let herself have the full weight of that moment without reducing it. Her father had been gone 8 months, and she had been so busy surviving the aftermath of his death that she had not yet properly grieved him. She had packed him away in the trunk along with everything else and told herself she would come back to it when she had the space. She was beginning to understand that the space had arrived. The formal legal resolution came on a Friday 2 weeks after Briggs's arrival. Cole rode up with the documents himself. The official restoration of Nathan's land. Claim, the voiding of Daly's disputed debt papers, the federal notice of charges filed. He set them on the table with the same business-like economy he brought to everything, and he explained the legal landscape in precise terms, and when he was done, he looked at Nathan and said, "It's over." Nathan picked up the land claim document. He looked at it for a moment. He set it back down. He said, "Thank you, Cole." Cole said, "Thank your wife," and left before Nathan could respond. Nathan looked at Emily. She was making bread. She was aware, made bread at nearly every significant moment since she arrived on this mountain, which was probably not accidental. The physical rhythm of it, the simplicity of the task against the complexity of everything else, the reliable way it produced something real and warm and useful from basic materials. "You keep baking," Nathan said. "The bread doesn't care what else is happening," Emily said, "and it needs to be made." He came and stood at the work table across from her. "Daly had a trial date set for March," he said. "Cole says it's solid. The wire fraud on top of the document fraud, he's not getting clear of it." "I know," Emily said. "The Plummer family is getting their claim reviewed," Nathan said. "The Garrity's and Billings Cole sent them the documentation. They may have grounds to contest the sale." "Good." Emily. She looked up. I was looking at her with the direct expression, not the weighing one anymore, she realized. That one had been retiring by degrees for weeks, replaced by something more settled, more certain. The look of a man who has done his measuring and arrived at his answer. "I'd like to tell you something," he said. "And I'd like you to let me finish before you tell me it doesn't require a response." She set down the dough. She gave him her full attention. "When I put that advertisement in the paper," Nathan said, I was desperate. I'm not going to dress it up differently than it was. I had 6 children and a ranch I was losing and a winter coming, and I needed someone who could cook and keep the house, and I didn't have anything more than that in mind when I did it." He paused. "When you stepped off that coach and I saw you, I thought I'd made a mistake. I thought you were going to be a problem I didn't have the energy to manage." "You were right to think so," Emily said. "I am a problem." The corner of his mouth moved. "You are," he agreed. "But you're Emily. You are the best problem that has ever come up this road." He put his hands on the work table, steadying himself slightly in the way of a man saying something he means too much to say carelessly. "What you've done for this family, not just the legal work, not just the Thomas and Clara, and the way Henry laughed last week, which I hadn't heard in 8 months, it's not something I can put a number to. And I know you don't want to be thanked, but I need you to know that I see it, all of it." Emily looked at him. "I see it," Nathan said again. "And He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were very direct. "I don't want this to be an arrangement," he said. "I want it to be a marriage." The kitchen was very quiet. From upstairs distantly, Thomas was singing something tuneless and cheerful to himself. A beam in the roof shifted with the cold. The fire moved. Emily looked at Nathan Brooks, at the honest, tired, stubborn, careful face of him, at the man who had carried 6 children and a failing ranch and 18 months of grief, with his hands open and his back straight, and she felt the thing she had been not naming for weeks arrive with complete clarity. "It already is," she said. He blinked. "A marriage," she said. "It's been one for a while. I just wasn't certain you'd noticed." Something happened in his face that she had not yet seen. Not relief, not exactly, but a kind of arriving. The way a person's face changes when they've been walking a long time, and they finally see the place they were walking to. He reached across the work table and took her flour-dusted hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She turned her hand and held his briefly, and then she went back to the bread because it genuinely did need to be made, and he stayed at the table, and the silence between them had a texture now that was entirely different from the silence of a month ago, warm and specific, and full of the particular certainty that comes from 2 people who have stopped being strangers in the ways that matter most. What happened with Clara came 3 days later, and it arrived the way the most important things do, sideways when neither of them was prepared for it. Emily was going through the trunk. She had started the process deliberately that morning alone in her room before the house woke, taking the decision the way she took most decisions as a practical matter, with clear steps. The trunk needed to be unpacked. The things in it needed to go in the places where they would be most useful. That was all. Except that it was not, of course, all. She lifted the first layer of notebooks and held them in her hands. Her father's handwriting on the dates spanning 15 years of practice, the precise and careful record of everything he'd learned and done and thought. She set them on the bed. She lifted the surgical kit in its leather roll and set it beside them. She lifted the medicinal reference and the agricultural manual and the 3 bound accounting ledgers and the small tin portrait of her father that she had wrapped in a scarf and placed at the very bottom where she would not see it every time she opened the lid. She unwrapped the portrait. He looked back at her from it, a formal photograph, the only one she had taken the year she turned 20. He was not smiling in the way people didn't smile in photographs then, but she knew the expression around his eyes, and it was warm and present and exactly the way he'd looked when he was pleased with something but trying to be professional about it. She had not looked at this photograph since she packed it. She sat on the edge of the bed with it in her hands for what might have been 5 minutes, or might have been longer. She heard the door. Clara stopped in the doorway. She had clearly not expected to find Emily there, or in that particular state, sitting on the bed with an open trunk and a photograph, and the specific composed expression of someone in the middle of something private. "I'm sorry," Clara said immediately. "I didn't know you were—" "It's all right," Emily said. "Come in." Clara hesitated, then came in and sat on the edge of the chair by the wall. the same chair Emily had sat in weeks ago when she came to talk to Clara about arrangements and mothers and the difference between taking someone's place and standing in a new one of your own. She looked at the photograph in Emily's hands. "Is that your father?" "Yes." Clara studied it for a moment. "He looks like someone who knew what he was doing." Emily looked at the photograph. "He did," she said. "Almost always. The times he didn't, he was honest about it, which I think counts for more." Clara was quiet. Then she said, "Do you miss him the way we miss Mama?" Emily thought about that seriously, the way the question deserved. "I miss him every day," she said. "I miss showing him things. He always wanted to know, he always asked questions about what I was learning, what I was figuring out. When I reconstructed Daly's accounts, my first thought was..." She stopped. "My first thought was that I wanted to show him, because he would have known immediately what it meant, and he would have had 3 questions, and he would have already seen the next step." Clara's expression shifted. "That's how it is," she said. "Not a question, just recognition." "Yes," Emily said. "That's how it is." A pause. Then Clara said, looking at the trunk, "You're unpacking it." "Yes. All of it. All of it." Clara looked at the things on the bed, the notebooks, the surgical kit, the ledgers. She looked back at Emily with that 16-year-old precision that Emily had come to understand was not precocity, but simply the natural result of a sharp mind that had been paying very close attention for a very long time. "You're staying," Clara said. "I'm staying," Emily confirmed. Clara looked at the photograph one more time. Then she stood up and went to the trunk and looked in. "Do you want help?" she said. "Putting things away." Emily looked at Nathan's oldest daughter, at the girl who had held a household together through grief, who had learned accounting by lamplight in a crisis, who had come to her 3 days ago and asked to learn medicine, who had just offered her presence at one of the most private moments Emily had had since her father died. "Yes," Emily said. "I'd like that very much." They unpacked the trunk together. Clara asked questions about almost everything. What the surgical instruments were, for what the medicinal labels said, why the ledgers were organized the way they were. Emily answered every question fully, and the answers led to more questions, and by the time the trunk was empty, and the morning light had shifted into the full angle of midday, they had covered basic triage, the mechanics of double-entry bookkeeping, and the agricultural properties of 3 different root vegetables. Clara held the empty trunk for a moment, tilted it, looked at the bare interior, set it upright. "It's lighter," she said. "Yes," Emily said. "Is that good?" Emily looked at the things that had been inside it. Her father's life's work, now distributed across shelves and drawers, and the surface of the small desk Nathan had moved into the room without being asked, without announcing it, simply there one morning when she woke up. She looked at the surgical kit on its shelf beside her father's medicinal reference. She looked at the ledgers which she intended to teach Clara from. She looked at her father's portrait, which she had propped against the wall where she could see it from the desk. "It's exactly right," she said. Spring came, the way Montana springs come, reluctantly, in fits and starts, the snow retreating by inches, and then rushing back before finally accepting that it had lost the argument. By March, the road was passable. By April, the kitchen garden was showing the first green of the things Emily had planted in the fall, the root vegetables and the herbs and the cold-tolerant greens she'd put in on faith that she would still be here to see them come up. She was. The daily trial was set for the first week of April, and Cole sent word that between the testimony of 7 families, the reconstructed accounts, and the federal wire fraud charge, the outcome was not in serious doubt. Martha Hendricks had given her deposition in February with the precision of a woman who had been preparing for this particular conversation for 18 months. Asa Greer's son Jonah had come back from Colorado for it, which Emily only learned about when Asa told her, and she had to excuse herself to the kitchen for a few minutes when she heard. The morning the verdict came, Nathan rode down himself, and Emily waited. She was making bread. Thomas was helping or performing a theatrical approximation of helping, which involved a great deal of flour in places flour had no business being. Bess was drawing something at the kitchen table. Henry was outside with the horses. Clara was at the desk in Emily's room, working through the second of her father's accounting ledgers, with a focus that had ceased to require supervision. William came through the door first. He looked at Emily. He said, "Guilty, on all counts." Thomas said, "What's guilty mean?" "It means," Bess said without looking up from her drawing, "that the bad man is going to jail." "For how long?" Emily asked William. "Cole says minimum 10 years on the federal charges alone." William's jaw was working. He was 14 and trying very hard to be as composed as he felt a man should be, and he was not entirely succeeding, which was entirely appropriate. "The land claims Jonah Greer's claim, the plumbers the Garrity's. Cole says they have grounds for civil recovery. He's going to help them file." Emily nodded. She went back to the bread. She heard Nathan's horse in the yard a few minutes later, and she heard him speak briefly to Henry outside, and then he came through the door and into the kitchen, and he looked at her across the room with the look, the arriving look, the settled one, and he said simply, "It's done." "I know," Emily said. "William told us." He hung up his coat. He came to the table and sat down and accepted the coffee Clara had appeared with because Clara had developed an apparently permanent awareness of when her father needed coffee, which was one of many small things Emily had watched happen over the winter, with a feeling she could not have adequately described. Thomas presented Nathan with a handful of bread dough shaped into something that was meant to be a horse. Nathan received it with complete seriousness. "That's fine work," he said. "It's a horse." Thomas confirmed. "I can see that." "Emily taught me," Thomas said. "She says you can make bread into any shape and it still tastes the same." "She's right," Nathan said. He looked at Emily. "She usually is." "Not always," Emily said. "Name one time." She thought about it. "I was wrong about Henry," she said. "When I first arrived, I thought he'd be the easiest. I had it exactly backward." Henry from his chair by the fire said without looking up, "That's fair." The laughter that moved through the kitchen was not a dramatic thing. It was small and quick and real, the kind that comes from people who have been through something hard together and are on the other side of it and can feel the difference. Thomas joined in without knowing what he was laughing at. Clara came to the kitchen doorway with the ledger still in her hand and her mouth curved. Bess looked up from her drawing and smiled with the uncomplicated ease of a child who had decided weeks ago that things were going to be all right. Nathan looked at Emily across the table, across the heads of 5 children, and the noise and warmth and ordinary particular chaos of a family in its kitchen, and the look that passed between them held everything that had happened in the months since that stagecoach rattled into Coldwater Creek, the cold nights and the cut fences and the sick child and the fraudulent ledgers and the long table with its lamplight and 2 people learning to trust each other past the point where trust was comfortable. It held all of that, and it held the morning ahead of them and the spring outside the window and the garden coming in and Clara's questions about medicine and Thomas's flower-covered horse. It held everything. That evening after supper, after the children were settled, Emily sat alone in her room for a moment. The trunk sat at the foot of the bed, empty and quiet. She had put nothing back in it. She intended to put nothing back in it. She looked at her father's portrait on the desk, and she said quietly to herself, or to him, or to the specific quality of absence that she had slowly learned to live inside of, "I found it, Papa." She meant the place she had been looking for since he died, since the creditor cousin and the sold practice and the stagecoach ticket to Montana, since the wood trunk and the one coat, and the deliberate necessary act of answering an honest advertisement from an honest man. She had found it. Nathan knocked on the open door. He had Thomas on his shoulder, mostly asleep, being carried to bed in the boneless, trusting way of exhausted children. "He fell asleep at the table," Nathan said. "Again." "He always does," Emily said. Nathan looked at her, the room, the empty trunk, the portrait on the desk. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," Emily said, and she meant it completely, which was a thing she had not been able to say without reservation for 8 months. "Go put him to bed. I'll be out shortly." Nathan nodded. He carried Thomas down the hall, speaking to him in the low, easy murmur of a father who has been doing this long enough that it's become the most natural thing in the world. Emily looked at the empty trunk one last time. She had carried it across 2 states and a mountain pass and the length of a brutal Montana winter. She had carried it through grief and dislocation and the determined practical work of building something new from the wreckage of what had been lost. She had carried it because it was all she had left, and she had not unpacked it, because you don't put down the last thing you're carrying until you're somewhere safe. She was somewhere safe. She stood up. She went to the door. She went into the warm-lit hallway of the Brooks house where Clara was reading in her room, and Henry was finally genuinely asleep, and Bess had kicked off her blanket in the way she always did, and would need it, retrieved before midnight, and Thomas was being settled by his father, with the low murmur and the particular patience of a man who had learned that love was not a feeling you announced, but a practice you maintained daily in the small and necessary acts. She retrieved Bess's blanket. She checked the kitchen fire. She paused in the hallway and listened to the house, the sounds of it, the breathing of it, the specific living quiet of a family at rest. Then Nathan came out of Thomas's room and found her in the hallway, and they stood together for a moment in the ordinary, irreplaceable way of 2 people who have chosen each other and are standing in the proof of that choice. "Ready," he said. She had been ready. She thought for longer than she'd known. "Yes," Emily Carter Brooks said. And the mountain held them all. 7 of them in that warm and hard-won house, safe in the truth that the greatest things a person carries are never the things that weigh the most, but the ones they finally set down in the place they were always meant to belong.